Have you ever wondered what would happen if you simply stopped being available? Not in a cruel way, not as a form of punishment, but as a deliberate choice to preserve your energy, to reclaim your identity. Most people won't tell you this, but availability is the most underestimated form of surrender. When you're always accessible, emotionally open, ready to help, quick to respond, you become predictable. You become a pattern, and people love patterns. They're easy to control. You see, most relationships today are not built on mutual respect. They're built on silent transactions. You give your time, your attention, your empathy, and in return, you hope for connection, love, validation. But what you often get is expectation, entitlement, exploitation. Carl Jung once said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." This isn't just about annoyance, it's about realization. Why does it bother you when someone pulls away? Why do you panic when someone stops replying? Because their withdrawal reflects your need, your fear of abandonment, your reliance on external confirmation of your worth. But here's the shift, the transformation that no one talks about. When you stop being emotionally available to everyone, you begin to see who was really there for you, and who was just there for the version of you that gave them what they wanted. The version that never said no. The version that explained, justified, apologized for simply having limits. You start to realize that most people aren't connected to you. They're connected to your reactions. They press a button, you respond. They make a demand, you comply. They disappear, and you chase. Not because you're weak, but because you've been conditioned to believe that saying yes is love, and saying no is rejection. But what if silence was your answer? What if you paused before reacting? What if you let the message sit unread, the call go unanswered, the pressure float by like passing wind? Would the world fall apart? Or would it simply reveal who built their world on your compliance? This isn't a call to isolate yourself. It's a call to become conscious, to stop playing the emotional emergency line for people who vanish the moment you need support. Because the truth is, not everyone deserves access to you. Not everyone has earned your presence. And yet, you've been giving it away like it costs nothing. But it does. It costs everything. Your peace, your sleep, your clarity, your sense of self. You begin to fade when you're constantly available. You start to lose your shape, your voice, your intuition. And you don't even notice it, because the world applauds you for being so selfless. But it's not selflessness. It's self-erasure. And when you finally step back, when you finally stop replying, stop chasing, stop explaining, the silence becomes unbearable. Not for you, for them. Because now they're no longer in control. Now they don't know who you are. And worse, they're forced to face who they are without your constant emotional validation. That's the shift. That's the power. They will call it distance. They will say you've changed, that you're acting strange, that you're no longer the same person. And they're right. Because for the first time in your life, you're no longer trying to be everything for everyone. You're not jumping to fix what's not yours. You're not rushing to explain what doesn't need justification. You've stopped feeding the illusion that your value lies in your availability, and that makes people uncomfortable. Why? Because your silence forces them to listen to their own noise. Your absence becomes a mirror they're not ready to face. They realize that without your reactions, they lose their power. Without your validation, they lose their narrative. And this is what Carl Jung meant when he said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, not who people expect you to be."
not who you pretended to be, but who you are, unfiltered, unafraid, unapologetic. But here's where it gets deeper. Your constant need to be available didn't begin yesterday. It was installed in you. You were raised to respond, to be polite, to be agreeable, to say yes when everything inside you screamed no. You learned that love is earned by performance, that silence equals guilt, that distance means rejection. So you performed, you were present, you said yes, you stayed longer than you should, and every time you did, you carved away a little more of yourself. But now you're done bleeding for people who never noticed you were wounded. You're done being the emotional cushion, the 2 a.m. lifeline, the unspoken therapist. Because the more you give without boundaries, the more invisible you become. And invisibility doesn't feel like peace, it feels like erasure. Still, part of you hesitates. You ask, what if I lose people? But my question to you is, what if you've already lost yourself trying to keep them? What if all this time, the real cost wasn't losing others, but losing you? Let's be honest. Most people aren't afraid of losing you. They're afraid of losing the version of you that made their life easier, the agreeable version, the compliant one, the one who bent over backwards just to avoid conflict. But that version was never sustainable. That version was killing you slowly, through guilt, through burnout, through internal resentment that had no voice. You've been taught that being unavailable is cold, selfish, rude. But that's a lie told by those who benefited from your lack of boundaries. Real love doesn't demand your constant presence. Real respect doesn't collapse when you say, "Not today." What happens when you stop responding immediately? When you don't show up just because they expect you to? When your time, your energy, your attention are no longer given on demand? They call it rude, but it's actually revolutionary. Because in that moment, you're teaching people that your life is not a public service, that your energy is not a vending machine, that your worth is not tied to your willingness to sacrifice. And some people will walk away. Let them go find someone else to drain, to guilt, to emotionally manipulate. That's not your weight to carry anymore. That's not your role to play. Because now, you're not reacting, you're choosing. You're not explaining, you're understanding. You're not chasing, you're attracting. And that changes everything. Here's the part they never prepare you for. The emotional withdrawal symptoms, not from others, from yourself. That version of you that needed to respond, to please, to maintain peace at any cost, will scream to come back. But let it scream, let it panic, let it fade. Because that version wasn't rooted in strength, it was built on fear. And fear is not your truth. There's a strange silence that follows your refusal to be constantly available. At first it feels like rejection, but soon it becomes clarity. You begin to notice who only reached out when they needed something, who disappeared the moment you stopped giving, and the silence becomes a filter, showing you who was truly connected to you and who was simply attached to the comfort you provided. And here's the catch. They won't say thank you for all the times you saved them, but they will criticize you for the first time you don't. That's when you realize it was never about love. It was about access. The moment access is denied, their perception changes, and so should yours. Carl Jung taught us that the process of becoming whole demands we separate from the crowd, from expectations, from personas we've outgrown. So when your silence begins to feel heavy, remember this isn't abandonment, it's evolution. If this message speaks to you, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell. It's time to reclaim your space.
They will test you, not always with words, but with silence, with provocation, with absence. They want to know if the old you is still there, the one who chases, who explains, who rushes back in fear of losing someone. But that version is gone, and your lack of reaction confuses them. Because silence doesn't just unsettle, it exposes. When you stop reacting, you start observing. You begin to see how much of your identity was built on other people's comfort. You start to recognize the manipulative patterns disguised as affection, the conditional kindness, the love that came with fine print. And suddenly, their frustration with your new boundaries becomes transparent. It's not that you've hurt them, it's that you've stopped playing the role that served them. This discomfort you're feeling, it's not loneliness, it's detox. You are cleansing years of programmed people-pleasing, and in that space, real power starts to grow. Power not built on control or attention, but on self-respect. Your silence is your new language. Your distance is your declaration. And those who respected your presence will never demand your availability. You don't need to raise your voice to make a point. You don't need to justify your boundaries to earn respect. Your peace speaks louder than your explanations ever did. And the moment you stop participating in games that drain you, you reclaim something sacred, your presence. Carl Jung once said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." Your silence isn't an escape, it's a confrontation. It forces you to see who you've been, how much you've tolerated, and why you were so afraid of disappointing others. And through that awareness, you begin to shed. You shed the persona.
You shed the need to be liked. You shed the guilt of saying no. And what remains is real, untouched, free. A version of you that's no longer driven by fear, but by clarity. The world might not celebrate this version. They might call you distant, difficult, arrogant. But understand this. They're not reacting to who you are. They're reacting to what they can no longer extract from you. That's not your burden. What's yours is the peace that comes from finally being aligned with yourself. You will lose people, but you will gain yourself. And that's a trade most never dare to make. Because it's easier to stay in patterns, even painful ones, than to face the unknown. But you didn't come this far to live on emotional autopilot. You came to evolve, to step into your truth, even if it costs you comfort. When you become unavailable to manipulation, something profound happens. You stop being a mirror for others' illusions, and you start becoming a reflection of your own power. That's when the world takes notice. Not because you're loud, but because you're centered. Because your silence radiates presence, and your absence speaks volumes. Now the real question is, can you handle being the villain in someone else's story, just because you finally chose to be the hero in your own? Let them think what they want. Let them misunderstand you. You weren't born to be understood by everyone. You were born to be whole. And in that wholeness, your value is no longer up for negotiation. So let me ask you, and I want you to answer in the comments. Would you rather be loved for who you're not, or be alone for finally choosing who you are?